another oldie but goodie for anxiety and nervousness, especially if you're hot and sweaty. Old-fashioned propanolol. It's an old blood pressure pill. They're great anti-anxieties. Clonidine also. If you want a sleeping pill, what's a good sleeping pill? It's pretty safe. Clonidine. It's just an old blood pressure pill. Take one of those, they'll make you sleep. And it's a lot safer than a lot of the other garbage that they're selling for sleep, that's for sure. Okay, now there's some kids where they'll get rage attacks and it's actually a psychomotor seizure. Yeah, and that's being controlled then with epilepsy drugs. Now, some of the natural things in my work is B6 and magnesium supplements, dimethylglycine supplements. They also act like natural seizure drugs. There's I know there's quite a few homeopathic things that actually act as anti-seizure medication. But what it is, it's seizure activity. Little tiny seizure activity. You've got to be given some kind of agent to stop that little bit of seizure activity. Like if you have a rage that comes out like a switch, some little minor provocation, boy, there's just a flying rage. It's probably psychomotor epilepsy. And then how about the ADHD drugs? Way too many of those given out. One thing we need to be doing is getting a lot more exercise, getting much better diet. We're not, when I was a little kid, we ate fish on Friday. The Catholics kind of had that as a rule. But you know what? It's really good nutritional wisdom because you were getting omega-3s. There's getting good scientific research on the omega-3s. Let's be getting a lot more exercise, not be eating so much rubbish. That would help on the ADHD. But some autistic kids are ready to give them stimulus. It makes them absolutely nuts. You gotta look up your drug interactions between every day. And some of these drug interactions on the herbal things are not available. I mean, let's say you need antibiotics and you're going to be, let's say for something potentially life-threatening. And if there were no antibiotics, I'd be dead. I've already had a hemorrhagic urinary tract infection that only can be treated with Cipro. And then I found out chickens are getting fed Cipro-like stuff. I was really upset about that. I'm very concerned about all these antibiotics that are going fed to animals. And the thing that's a concern is it's going out on the land. We've got a massive, uncontrolled experiment here. And there's almost no studies on what's happening with the land. There's one University of Illinois study. All I can say when I look at the scientific literature, and I read Science and Nature, and this is not my area of expertise, I'm reading a lot of red flags. I'm not calling them red flags, but when I was a little kid, I would have died from pneumonia if I hadn't been antibiotics. I would have died from this hemorrhagic urinary tract infection. That was just 5 years ago. These two men that I just had dinner with last week would have died from MRSA. Vancomycin hadn't worked. You've got to look up your interactions. And I would recommend if you get really sick and you have to go on antibiotics, plant-based herbal things that go off them for the 10 days that you're on the antibiotics. That's just from my own experience, because what they do is they treat the drug like a toxin and strip it out of the body. AIDS drugs interact with St. John's wort, and so does anti-rejection drugs. Like if you have a liver transplant, you've got to take anti-rejection drugs. These are pretty important drugs that you really, really need to have work. If I take too many cold pills or sinus medication, that makes my antidepressant not work. Well, then I just got to stop taking so many cold pills. And then there's certain interactions that are super dangerous. Okay. Special diets, they definitely work for some people. I can't emphasize enough the importance of exercise. Many kids don't get enough exercise. Omega-3s, poor diet, you get more depression. You get a diet full of sugar, high glycemic carbs, and all kinds of rubbish. There's more depression. Actual scientific paper on that. Here is my family history. Autism has a very strong genetic basis, but the genetics is very complicated. You see, old-fashioned Mendelian genetics, that explains just a little piece of genetics. Another thing is you have little bits of code, and you can either have extra copies of a bit of code or subtracted copies. They're called copy number variations. This is what sort of like gives genes their volume controls. And the finding in autism is incredibly complex. there is no autism gene. You're not going to be able to take it out without taking out a ton of other traits. There's a point where the mild versions are just personality variants. I've looked at a lot of families, often have a lot more geeks and engineers in the family history, anxiety and depression, a lot of more learning problems in the family history. On the mother's side, we've got visual thinkers, food allergies on my dad's side, and we've got Asperger traits definitely in our family history. See, it's sort of like a little bit of this trait, you get some really smart people. Too much of the trait, you've got a real problem. Einstein today would be labeled autistic in many, many different school systems today. Now what I think about is, what would happen to him in today's school system? That's something that just makes me shudder. Think about that. Here's a book about famous scientists and musicians that probably were on the spectrum. Great book to give a teenager who's being teased and tortured for being geeky and weird. That's just some places to get information on autism. And what I want to do, I want to thank everybody for coming, and we're going to do a few questions. People on the autism spectrum that actually smoke pot. It's very calming. They do it to calm themselves down. And when you look at sort of like all different illegal drugs out there, and marijuana, in a lot of ways, I think it's less bad than alcohol. I mean, I've known people that alcoholics that are mean drunks. I worked in construction. I got involved in quite a few of those, and not nice at all. But there's some people that, like all that anxiety that I had, they take it because it calms them down. But then things like antidepressants also work really, really well, with a low dose. I mean, I know tons of designers are taking a little bit of Prozac, and you get just the right dose, you get rid of the anxiety, and there's no intellectual impairment. I'm not a fan of any of substances that kind of like mess up your ability to think. When I found out about that memory thing with Paxil, I had like 4 or 5 people now tell me about that. I tried taking this awful drug called buspirone, brand name, dreadful crap. I got rid of my anxiety, but I couldn't think. I couldn't gather my thoughts. I was dreadful. I mean, we've got to have things where people can think. Okay.
You gave a lot of examples about, I just didn't do that because mother said don't do it, or mother said do this, or what about for our kids who just simply don't do it? There's a real stubbornness trait. How do you get through that?
Well, I can tell you right now, if I had done something like wreck the living room, that's what happened. And I can only remember getting spanked twice. And I knew if I destroyed the living room, that would be, I was allowed to go in there, the door was open, but I knew that was a grown-up room, and any bad stuff in there you just didn't do. The other thing, when I was really young, I was always encouraged to do lots of different things. Like, okay, I wanted to just draw horses all the time. I said, well, let's do a beach. Mother would say, well, let's do a beach. And then I painted a beautiful picture of a beach, and Mother put it in a professional frame with glass. I knew the difference between a refrigerator door and a professional frame. See, that kind of thing I recognized.
Do you think some of that stubbornness could be sensory related though too?
Yes, this is where you've got to figure out, is it behavior or is it sensory? Like, maybe he doesn't want to go to a restaurant because it's noisy. A lot of restaurants now, there's a zillion TVs all around, and it's just too overwhelmingly stimulating. You see, and there's somewhere that these sensory problems can be extremely debilitating. I wish they would do a lot more research on the sensory things and how to treat them. Because I know people where it's absolutely debilitating. They could not work in the office environment upstairs, even though it'd be pretty quiet. They wouldn't be able to work in that. They can't do regular stuff. They can't socialize in regular places. They can't go to a sporting event or something like that. They're just too visual sensitivity problems, fluorescent lighting, or they've got sound sensitivity, they can't tolerate. Now this brings up the thing about earplugs. Let's say you put on headphones or earplugs. They gotta be off for half the day. Because if you wear them all the time, your brain will get more sensitive trying to compensate. You know, you've all had wax taken out of your ears by the doctor, and your hearing only sounds loud afterwards. That's the brain compensating. So it's okay to wear the earplugs to go to the restaurant, but then when you get home and it's quiet, they've got to come off. Half the day they've got to be off. And the same thing with headphones.
What about an adolescent that when you try to talk to them, they say, I just need it quiet, I need to think?
Some of them do. The question was, what do you do with an adolescent that says, I just need to have it quiet, I need to think? There are some that definitely need time to think. See, I process slowly. And if I have to really think about something complicated, I like to say, well, we'll get back with you tomorrow about that. It takes me longer to think. Because you've got to remember, the processing speed of the brain is slower. Now, for a lot, you see, social stuff, you know, where you're kind of keeping track of all the social things going on in the room, that takes a tremendous amount of processor space in the brain. That's really complicated data to process. But you see, if I'm designing something and I'm sitting there quietly drawing, that doesn't require all that processing speed. And I can just slowly there work on it. And the pictures come up in my mind, and there's also a tendency to ask you to do something, just say no. But then, if you think about it for a while, then they're likely to say, I know a number of people where you ask them to do something, they'll go, no. And then a day later, you bring it up, they might be willing to do it. You give them a chance to mull it over. Or you might say, well, you can give me an answer the next day. You know, like I was afraid originally to go to the ranch, and then I was gotten pictures of the ranch. I talked to my aunt on it. Well, they didn't actually have a phone on the ranch, but she came to visit and had a chance to talk to her. In other words, no surprises. Like, let's say you're going to go to a new school. Let's do a tour of the school before you go to that school. It's really important.